First of all, could you tell us a little bit about where we are, Mr. Testa,
Okay.
right now at this particular moment?
Okay, we're in the conference room in my law office at 424 Landis Avenue. My father and Frank Basil, along with my father's brother, Joseph Testa, who's now a retired Superior Court judge, founded this law firm originally as Basil, Testa and Testa in 1983. And we're sitting in the library of that law firm.
What's the meaning of this library to you?
I mean, it's a lot of history here, obviously. My grandfather sort of started the career of the Testas in the law profession, and his original law books still sit in this library over there, which is really interesting. And I took out number two today to show you, which is because it's easier to take out than number one, and it was published in 1919, which is 100 years ago. So I find that to be really interesting. That it's a 100-year-old book that we. So there's a lot of history of the law and jurisprudence in this office.
You're part of a family legacy of law in Vineland. How did that begin?
Well, my grandfather was born in 1915. He didn't speak a word of English until first grade. He moved on to become valedictorian of his high school, also valedictorian of his college. Went to what is now known as Rutgers Law School. He had gone to Temple undergrad. And he became a lawyer and loved the law very much. He also was involved in politics. He was the first elected mayor of the city of Vineland. It used to be a borough and a township. Two of his three sons became lawyers, my uncle Joseph and my father Michael Sr. And I think that they really wanted me to come back to Vineland to follow in the family tradition of law.
Why do you think it was the legal tradition in which your family distinguished itself? Why was it law?
I think my grandfather always just had an ultimate respect for the rule of law. And I mean, he was a staunch Republican as well, I can tell you, like myself. He loved politics. And I truly believe that he found the legal profession to be one of the most, at least it might not be today, but it was probably one of the most respected professions of his day. Being a counselor at law, I remember seeing his original sign, Max, that said, Frank J. Testa, counselor at law. And I know that was something that he was just so proud of, to be a lawyer and to be respected in the community.
The son of a cobbler.
Yes, yeah. I showed you, a picture in his office that was of a cobbler, and one of the retired judges who's now deceased, a federal judge, had told me that he knew he was a man not when he was bar mitzvahed, but then when he got to go to Mr. Testa to have a pair of shoes made. And my grandfather would often tell me, Mikey, don't forget where you came from. That's where we came from.
So why now? Why did you get into this race now, sir? Running for state senate? What was your particular motivation in wanting to challenge for this seat at this moment in time?
Well, Max, you and I have known each other a few years. I've been chairman of the Cumberland County Republican Organization now for 5 years. I've seen Jeff Van Drew and his team get elected over the past number of years. And I've seen a lot of promises, most of them empty. I remember when Jeff Van Drew first was elected, he promised the completion of Route 55. There's an empty promise. He promised that he was this conservative Democrat. We have a sanctuary state under Governor Phil Murphy. I think it's high time that South Jersey has a conservative voice that doesn't call themselves a conservative Democrat, that they have someone who is a proud conservative Republican. And I'm glad that I have a team like Antoine McClellan and Eric Simonson to run with, because we all share the same exact values.
So you mentioned the failure of Mr. Van Drew to complete that project. Are there any other issues that your voters are telling your constituents are mentioning to you as things that they want to see your team do if you were to get to Trenton?
Absolutely. I mean, one of them being ending the sanctuary state. I can tell you just recently, 2 days ago, there was an article, I believe it was actually on Insider New Jersey, about an individual who was charged with raping a teenager who was released from the county jail. People don't want to hear that. This sanctuary state policy is dangerous. It's putting citizens at risk. It's also putting law enforcement at risk. And I just think it's an absolute insane policy. And I use that term insane clinically. I don't understand how any elected official can place their left hand on the Bible and their right hand in the air and swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state of New Jersey, and then come out and say, I'm all for a sanctuary state. This is the right thing to do. And especially to have an attorney general that's 100% on board with this madness.
You've raised the issue of driver's licenses for undocumented workers. Your opponents say that they also oppose them. But why do you believe your advocacy would be more effective?
Well, I can tell you I'm 100% opposed to driver's licenses for illegal immigrants because, I remember I'm a child of the 80s. I remember the American Express commercial when whichever actor it was back then that would hold the American Express card and says, membership has its privileges. Well, citizenship should certainly have its privileges. When myself, you, Antoine McClellan, or Eric Simonson goes to renew their driver's license, we need 6 points of identification. Why are we then going to have undocumented illegal immigrants go to the Motor Vehicle Commission with 1 or 0 points of identification and have a driver's license? And we all know now that at the Motor Vehicle Commission, you get registered to vote. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
I really think this is a scam in order for the Democrat Party in their attempt for 100% control of the voter population. And I'll tell you why I think I will be more effective as an advocate in Trenton. Right now, our legislative team, the Democrat legislative team that identifies themselves as conservative Democrats and the Van Drew team, are completely ineffective. They haven't been able to get Route 55 completed. They call themselves conservative Democrats, but let's face it, they have a caucus in Trenton. They know that their vote really doesn't matter, that the leftist liberal agenda is going to steamroll through with or without their vote. So they can hoodwink the voters of Legislative District 1 into believing that they're conservative Democrats. They're not.
Let me give you an example of where they might argue that they're controlling the agenda and stopping a progressive agenda by the governor, legalization of marijuana. So the South Jersey senators all opposed it this last legislative cycle. They would make the case that, hey, we're the guys that in fact stopped this piece of progressive legislation from moving forward. And you say?
But they're not disavowing their party, Max. They're not disavowing their party ever. They have this ultra leftist, I don't use the term progressive, agenda coming out of Trenton, but they're not opposing their own party. They'll say, oh, well, look at what our votes are. But they're not disavowing their party, nor are they disavowing the massive amount of money that they get from the likes of the General Majority PAC. I mean, they want to talk about Bob Hugin donating money to the Cumberland County Republican Organization. I'll take Bob Hugin over Bob Menendez any day. That's a challenge I'll gladly take. They didn't disavow Bob Menendez. And, I really think that, they must be in the wrong echo chamber there in Trenton, because Bob Hugin won this district by 16 points. Donald Trump won this district by 9 points. And here they're going to try to criticize me and any of the other Republicans associated with my campaign as taking money from Bob Hugin, and they refuse to name him, by the way, which I find to be somewhat laughable as well.
Mike, you're running for a state office, but I asked your opponent this question, and I think I should ask you. We are in a very auspicious news cycle with the announcement earlier this week, and she was here in Atlantic City last night by Nancy Pelosi, that she was going to pursue an impeachment inquiry into the president. What's your reaction to that?
Nancy Pelosi knows her radical left base, like AOC. I find her reaction to AOC's tweet to be really the impetus for all of a sudden for this impeachment inquiry. I haven't heard my opponent, Bob Andrzejczak, oppose Nancy Pelosi's impeachment inquiry. Jeff Van Drew sort of did, but that's because he knows his base. He knows his congressional district. He certainly knows his legislative district. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Van Drew gets primaried because of it, and he should be, quite frankly. But the voters are starting to realize who the Van Drew team really is. They're a team of empty promises. They know the political chess game, but that's not really who they are in Trenton. That's not who Jeff Van Drew is in Washington.
What do you think about the charge at its heart, though, from a legal position of the president having this conversation and the allegation of treason based on uh, the exchange of information with the leader of a foreign government. What do you say to that?
I mean, think about it. The whistleblower came forward with only hearsay information. As a trial attorney, none of that information would hold up in a court of law at all, and yet they jumped the gun. Whatever happened to our constitutional rights? What happened to due process? They're jumping the gun and rushing to judgment on our president. And let's face it, they've been looking to try to impeach Donald Trump since he took the oath of office. This is just yet another step to try to chip away at the job that he's doing. Hey, look, can everybody agree with Donald Trump and his tweets? Probably not. But I think overall, Donald Trump, our president, is winning. Unfortunately, he can't win here in New Jersey because of the insane policies that are coming from Governor Phil Murphy and the rest of his ilk in Trenton.
Does the impeachment, this is the last question on it, Mike, and I appreciate your answering it, but does the impeachment inquiry backfire on the Democrats here? In other words, do you think that will galvanize voters in the first district toward your team? In other words, a dubious reaction to denying perhaps the president's reelection by, or at least besmirching him this way with impeachment.
I absolutely think this is going to charge the batteries of the silent majority that exists here in South Jersey. I think a lot of people are fed up with the radical left, that they're just attempting at every single corner to impeach our president and stop any level of progress that he is doing internationally and here domestically.
So let's get back to the district, and you mentioned the general majority PAC. You're running against a large Democratic machine in the region. Can we go to first of all, the mailer that they released that hit your team and hit a member of your team who's sitting with us, and we'll talk momentarily. What do you think the voters will say to that attack?
Hopefully the voters wake up once and for all, and I mean that, because there is no doubt in my mind that mail piece was vile, disgusting, and racist. And those aren't my words. Those are the words of Governor Murphy, Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, and Democrat Chairman Curry. Those are their words, not mine. So, look, my running mate, Antoine McClellan, he was the target. So I think that question might be better centered at him with regards to whether he believes it's racist. But I could tell you, even from the photo of me trying to stuff cash in my pocket, what were they trying to show? That wasn't me. It was my head, obviously. It was on someone else's body. What were they trying to invoke? Were they trying to invoke something that was sort of anti-Italian? Was it anti-Semitic? I mean, I find it to be absolutely reprehensible that we live in a time that a mail piece like that is deemed acceptable by anybody.
You were offended by it, the way they tried to depict you.
I was offended by it because, look, I call balls and strikes, I think, pretty objectively. But the one question I would have is, I can only imagine the uproar that it would have been had Antoine McClellan been a Democrat and that mail piece came from a Republican-controlled super PAC. I have no doubts that would be on Good Morning America and every major news network, for people crying for people to resign, for people to renounce it. Yet my opponent won't even renounce the general majority PAC for that, when his own party, 3 leaders of his own party, have denounced it as vile, disgusting, and racist and called for apologies. My opponent won't even renounce it, and that's despicable.
Well, there's such a divide in the Democratic Party that don't you think their calculation is, as long as you're pointing to Governor Murphy as someone who has some authority on this issue, you're closer to Murphy than they are, given this divide between Sweeney. Even on something as reprehensible as this, they're still closer to the Sweeney side of the party. And here's Mike Testa and his team referring to the moral authority of Governor Phil Murphy. What do you say to that?
What I say to that is, go look at Andrew Zach's voting record. His voting record is 95% or better with Governor Murphy. So if he's going to try to say I'm closer to Governor Murphy, that's laughable as well. He's voted with him 95% of the time. He voted for a budget that took millions of dollars away from our veterans and put it towards illegal aliens getting college education, illegal aliens getting a legal defense fund, How does he explain that? How does he explain that?
They say they're independent. And what do you say to that?
If people can fall for that, then you know what? They'll get the government that they deserve. They're not independent. They're fully controlled by the Camden County Democrat political machine. They're fully controlled by the general majority PAC. They don't have to raise money organically like myself, Antoine McClellan, and Eric Simonson. They just get to go campaign and do their Facebook messaging all the time, and then the money magically appears from the general majority PAC. If they're so independent, let them denounce the general majority PAC and see what happens to their campaign.
What is it like in terms of the financial challenge running against that group? In other words, are they outspending you 5-1, 3-1? Have you been able to ascertain the differentiation there in spending between the two campaigns?
That's a great question. Organically, I think you actually did the article, Max, was that I had outraised, at last check, I had outraised my opponent 6-1 organically. But again, all of the money that just comes flowing in from outside sources, it is very difficult to ascertain. We know they're on cable news already. Bob Andrzak's commercial is running on Fox News, which I find to be pretty laughable as well. They're trying to paint him as this conservative Democrat. Look, I thank Bob Andrzak for his service. He made, darn near an ultimate sacrifice to our country in serving. But it doesn't mean he's best served to serve us in Trenton.
Could you talk a little bit about what it's like to run against a war hero? In other words, I remember when he first joined the Van Drew ticket, it was a difficult time for the Van Drew team. They had one of their members, I think, leave the ticket in disgrace. And it seemed to me that every time things got a little tough, they were able to invoke patriotism and the flag and service. And it seems to me that they're trying to do that again. Is it difficult to kind of get in there and remind voters that there are issues here, not just this broad patriotic theme?
I don't think it is difficult anymore because I think that the veil has been lifted, so to speak. I think a lot of the voters that I interact with, they think Bob is a very nice guy, but that the issues aren't being tackled properly in Trenton. One of the startling statistics I learned the other day was that Cape May County sends $550 million of tourism dollars to Trenton and gets $1 million back. Essex County sends $4 million to Trenton and magically gets $6 million. If Legislative District 1 had proper representation in Trenton, that would not happen. That is a disparity. That is an absolute despicable disparity. Also, $3.7 million were taken out of Cape May County schools alone, pursuant to a budget that Bob Andrzak voted for. Then he had the nerve to go to Trenton and do a sort of a march against Trenton on a budget that he voted for. I mean, how intellectually disingenuous can you get? And then he says he's independent. I don't know who he's independent from. The Wildwood Boardwalk was supposed to get $4 million a year for repairs. Governor Murphy vetoed this bill. And what happened? Bob Andrzak said he was furious with the governor. He was furious with the governor. So then he's there with Senator Sweeney in Wildwood on the boardwalk, actually under the boardwalk. And they said that they were going to somehow find a way to raid the Transportation Trust Fund, which is our gas tax dollars, to repair Wildwood's boardwalk. I mean, it's really just preposterous. I think people are awaking to the issues, Max.
You're a trial attorney. So if you were prosecuting your opponent and making the case to a jury, how would you begin to outline that case? What would you say to the jury if your opponent, Senator Andrzak, were sitting there on trial? What would you start with? How would you make that argument?
I think first that's a great question, by the way. I think first I would start very generally. I mean, this is what happens when you have one party rule in Trenton. There's no doubt. There's only, unfortunately, after Senator Bucco's passing, now there's only 13 Republican senators out of 40. We need the checks and balances desperately in Trenton that our constitutional republic provides. Right now in the state of New Jersey, we do not have a check and balance system, and Bob Andrzejczak is part of that problem. Also, he votes with, as much as he wants to distance himself from Governor Murphy, he votes with him 95% of the time. I don't think I agree with Governor Murphy on 5% of things, let alone 95% of the things. We desperately need that check and balance in our state, the Garden State. And it's so often that obviously South Jersey is absolutely forgotten. So there's another aspect. I think he's completely ineffective in Trenton. And it's very sad. You look at Route 55, it was supposed to be completed many, many years ago. It hasn't been completed. Wildwood's Boardwalk is crumbling. The tram car can't even go past Convention Hall. Here he is, you know, there with Senate President Sweeney, who does a lot for South Jersey. Not for our district, because he's not in our district. He does a lot for his district. But the leadership that we've had in Legislative District 1 hasn't provided any real effective leadership. You look at Route 55. I'd like to go on about that, Max, a little bit if I may.
Let me stop it here and then restart it again.
Sure.
Yep.